Hello, School Transportation Nation. Tony Corpin here, publisher and president of School Transportation News. We're glad you made it to the podcast. It's brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, and our friends at Zoom. All right, we've got a great lineup today of our editorial tag team, Taylor Ekbatani and Ryan Gray. Guys, welcome.
Hey, Tony. It's great to be here, as always.
Yeah, excited for another episode.
I know. So we got lots to talk about. It was a headline heavy week. We have Collins Bus selling to Forest River, parent company of Starcraft Bus. So Ryan, I think you were covering that story with Taylor, keeping an eye on all things happening. Did I see $303 million? I don't know. Is that a deal? Seems like a deal for Collins, right? I mean, I don't know what the financials are, but
it seems like it. I mean, the market share leader in Type A, and obviously a storied history there from its founding in 1967. Really, the first Type A small school bus developed. So it's got that legacy behind it. Taylor, we'll get into you in a minute. You wrote the article and you've spoken with some folks and you're continuing to speak with folks. But what really harkened to me is I saw that $303 million and I thought the same thing. It seemed a little low. And I don't know if that's a reflection on current market conditions. I know we've talked a lot about the shortage of chassis. Rev Group obviously was looking to unload it. They're actually with this deal, they're also walking away from their transit group. They're selling El Dorado, another well-known brand in the marketplace. So certainly Forest River, one of the largest shuttle bus and van manufacturers, and obviously also a familiar name to this industry. You mentioned Starcraft brand there for Forest River, was in the school bus market for, what was it, Tony? Maybe like 6 or 7 years or so at least. Developed an electric version of the school bus. And then, just as we see the musical chairs of business in this industry, how the players come and go and the relationships seem to get reignited. Forest River basically, when several years ago, agreed to no longer have a Starcraft school bus model tied to an agreement with Rev Group, kind of tied to some of the shuttle business as well. And then here we are, Forest River's back as a main player in the industry.
Yeah, and I reached out to Forest River to get some more information. So there's a preliminary article at stnonline.com that kind of explains the semantics of it, but maybe by the time you guys listen to this, there'll be more updates there. But for me, it was just really interesting because Collins Bus has such a deep history. So when I was doing some research for the article, I mean, they've been around for a long time. So that was super interesting to me, just kind of learn more about Collins Bus and what this kind of will mean going forward.
Yeah, and Tony, I know you had some conversations with Ford. Forest River, one of the largest buyers of Ford chassis. And something else that after talking to you last week about this that stood out to me was, we know that Collins has been a big GM purchaser. So what does this mean going forward?
Well, I know with Rev Group, we saw them cite the reason they were getting out of the market, which was supply chain, right? So we know that there's been a big chassis shortage. It's been unpredictable. There's been a lot of factors that would be the chip shortage, or there was the United Auto Workers strike. There were definitely some things that happened. I know the RV business had really ramped during COVID, and that's starting to temper down. So we'll see if that doesn't impact long-term chassis supply. But I know in speaking with numerous Type A manufacturers, it didn't seem like there was going to be much of a change from 23 to 24. Now, one could infer that Ford is going to give preferential treatment to Starcraft or now Collins, in terms of this solution. Now, also keep in mind, Collins and Ford developed this Type A electric that they had rolled out. Now, Ford, when we spoke to them at the ACT Expo last year, said, look, it was not a partnership. It was a collaboration. They were open to other partners. Now, looking at that, one could infer, okay, Starcraft probably viewed this as, hey, look, one of our key supplier partners developed this with another competitor. Maybe we should go in and grab this opportunity to now bring it under our umbrella and see if we can't kind of use some of the engineering and R&D to speed up our process. And maybe there's some opportunities there. So I would feel that we're going to see more from Ford and Collins and Starcraft for that matter. Now, there's not necessarily probably going to be an embargo with the brand. So very interested in seeing what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that, let's not forget, too, that Lightning e-motors left the scene. They were being liquidated late last year. So that was a main partner in this with the electric drive. So we have the Ford Transit Electric. We know that it's been ramping up. Collins was the first purveyor of that. So it definitely a lot afoot in the Type A marketplace.
Yeah, and I'm curious if, they'll even expand and do more than Type A's and look at doing larger vehicles.
Well, and we know that Starcraft had that Type C that they developed with Creative Bus Sales, which is now known as Model 1. So where's that going to, lead? So you're right.
Now, if you also remember, Ryan, they had built their Type C on a Hino chassis, right? We haven't seen Hino in the school bus market, which they're the fleet division of Toyota. So, are we going to see that reemerge in some capacity, or will it be some straight electric EV offering? So I really don't know what to expect, but definitely there's going to be some opportunities in the market as we see more and more entrants take advantage of some of the government funding, as well as, the shortage in the Type A market. Prices remain high. There's opportunities there to see if there's more products and diversification in the space. So quite curious to see where it's going to land. But before we get to some more headlines, we have a message from our sponsor. This message is brought to you by Zoom, the leader in modernizing student transportation. Are you tired of the status quo and the same outdated school transportation outcomes? School districts nationwide, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oakland, Seattle, Howard County, Maryland, and Reading, Pennsylvania, have chosen a new school transportation provider, Zoom. Zoom has transformed the yellow school bus experience, bringing world-class technology and operations that the industry has never had access to before. School districts are gravitating to Zoom for their turnkey approach that leads to unprecedented outcomes, including optimized routes, reduced commute times, the ability to track kids to and from school on the bus, and improved communication via an app connecting parents, drivers, and school administrators. All the while saving significant dollars that the school district can put back in the classroom. The future of student transportation is here. To learn more, visit Zoom at www.ridezum.com. That's www.ridezum.com to learn more. All right, we're back. Taylor, we had some big news out of Ohio, right? So we had a working group based on the fatality that had occurred with a student being ejected. And there were a lot of undertones that seatbelts were going to be outfitted or mandated on all Ohio school buses. And watching back the press conference with Governor DeWine and his team, they kind of broke it down, and they had some discoveries with the working group that kind of surprised them. You want to run us down with that story?
Yeah, so the long-awaited recommendations are out. So if you haven't seen them, definitely check out the article. But yeah, like you said, it does not include a call for lap shoulder seatbelts. Ohio is going to stick with the local districts, up to them. If they want to go with lap shoulder seatbelts, they can. And I think what really stood out to me was that they kind of looked at a bunch of safety technologies and said it's kind of up to the district which one they want to go with. And so one of the recommendations actually recommends to create a grant program where districts can apply and get funding for either lap shoulder seatbelts or some other safety technology that they would prefer on their school buses. So the recommendations are out, no seatbelts, but lots of other great recommendations that they came up with, especially in terms of driver training. I noticed that was a really big kind of area that they looked at. And there's a lot of recommendations that focus on more training for the drivers and having the drivers, there's a driver perspective in there about the training specifically that they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly a conversation that, I'm looking to field it, especially at STN Expo Indy in June. One of the things that stood out to me that I had not realized, there's 611 school districts in Ohio, and according to this report released last Wednesday, 382 of those school districts have at least one large school bus equipped with lap shoulder belts, or it said seat belts, so we don't know if it's lap belts, or I'm assuming lap shoulder belts. We know all Type A's, speaking of Type A's, they need to have lap shoulder belts because that's the federal law. That was updated by NHTSA in 2011. But the large school buses, that has been left to the local district's decision. So that's something that stood out to me. So certainly, when looking at should there be a mandate or not, certain states like Indiana has said, we're not mandating because, there's so always such a worry about unfunded mandates and what legislatures with these laws, some of the unintended consequences. And definitely that stood out to me in watching the various meetings that were held last fall. And I'd written a little bit about this. One thing that I had heard was, perhaps some of those old wives' tales, if you will, of some of the ramifications of seatbelts that have been disproven over the last couple of years. Harkening back to some of the old arguments from 15, 20 years ago that really aren't at play anymore. But yet, cost, that always came up. And how do you put a price tag on a child's life? That's always something I hear, and that's always a tough one to really win in the court of public opinion. But it's a reality, right? And I think what we see with this recommendations is a pretty wide scope that they're looking at school bus safety. And like you said, Taylor, a lot in there about driver training, fully illuminated stop arms. So Ohio requires stop arms on the front and the back of the bus. So 2 stop arms per bus. So they, talking about converting all lights to LEDs, electronic stability controls and lane departure warnings. So really coming into that lane of collision avoidance, and even, trying to update the specifications so that school buses must pass the Colorado rack test. So that's one of the tests for structural integrity that many states follow. So certainly, a lot there for the industry, especially a lot of the vendor side, Tony, to really lean in on. I'm sure they're very interested on how some of the state specs might get affected.
Well, I know Governor DeWine said, hey, I'm going to have to go to the legislature and find money, right? And they threw out a number of $13,000 per bus, not seatbelts. So they were going to fund. And so I did just a quick calculation when they said how many buses were in the state. And I came up with, if you give $13,000 to every single school bus in the state, it was $169 million. That's a big number. I'm not sure they're going to scrape $169 million together. Now, he did say it was going to be over time based on replacement cycle, which they had said replacement cycle was 10% a year, though he did infer that the buses can go longer than 10 years. So as we know, that is the case. So everybody's a little different in terms of the replacement cycles. But it led me to believe they were going to come up with a pretty significant amount of money in the short term to help fund these recommendations. And they were serious about it. Now, one of the reporters in the actual press conference said, hey, is there leftover COVID money that could be applied for some of this technology? And I thought that was interesting, right? They're just kind of trying to reach and say, hey, what buckets can we pull from? I know we have a few clips from the actual press conference. So producer Claudia will probably roll those for us. So why don't we listen to what happened?
Yeah, Tony, first we'll have a short clip from Governor Mike DeWine as he kind of provides an intro.
But the overall takeaway of the working group is in line with what studies have consistently shown. School buses are the safest method of transportation for school students. There's nothing even close. But as this report shows, there are things that we can do. And I would say because we can do them and we know what will make a difference, we need to do them.
And then we have about a minute-long clip from Andy Wilson, the director of the Ohio Department of Public Safety and the working group's chair. And he kind of explains the group's decision on not mandating seatbelts in school buses.
If I'm being completely honest, when I started working with this group, I tried to come in with an open mind with respect to all of the issues we were going to tackle. But when we started the work, I had a preconceived notion, and I know in talking to other members of the working group, they had a preconceived notion that there was a good chance we were going to come out the backside with a recommendation mandating putting seatbelts on all school buses. As a parent, as a member of the community, it just seemed kind of makes sense. As somebody who tells their kid, buckle up every time they get in the car, it kind of makes sense. However, as a group, after hearing from the experts, hearing from our bus drivers, looking at the data or the lack of data from states that have mandated seatbelts, and listening to school districts who have tried pilot programs on their buses, we became convinced that a statewide mandate of seatbelts on buses is not the most effective use of government resources to keep our kids safe.
The real takeaway from this is that when we really look at these recommendations, that's what they are. They're simply recommendations. And we always talk about various technologies that have the potential to create safety on school buses. And right in this press conference, they emphasize that school buses were the safest mode of transportation by a landslide, by any other form based on their measures. And so again, they're telling us more of what we know, but Governor DeWine said, hey, we can make these buses safer. Like that is what we need to do because we can. And the technology exists for that. So I think that's really a call to action for the industry to really kind of take a hard look at, yeah, we are the safest industry, but how can we do better with the available technology portfolio? Now, they did talk a lot about, okay, how did they come to this no seatbelt conclusion? And the discussion also came as, how did the bus get hit? Was it not visible enough? Could have other traffic issues? And they talked a lot about driver training and almost defensive driving within the press conference. So, the drivers are really hungry and thirsty for like what they can get from a training perspective. And then also one driver had reached out kind of through a back channel and discussed how they didn't want seatbelts because of a sheer fear of having to cut a child out of a bus that could be burning. Right? Like there is a genuine fear of a school bus driver. Like how would they do it? Like, and I think when you start to unpack that maybe it's unfounded in terms of the technology. Then you're talking about fire suppression and all these other things. So, there's genuine concern about what are the unintended consequences of deploying certain technologies. And, that was on full display during this recommendation and discussion. They really tried to provide a lot of direct insights from how the working group kind of came to these decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know some of that came from a survey that one of the working group members, a school bus driver there in the Cleveland area, had apparently held, I think, some telephone interviews, some 1,300 or 1,400 drivers over the last year, and a lot of those were from that. And again, what I did not realize was that if you have over 300 school districts already have apparently at least one large bus with seatbelts, then, is there more familiarity with seatbelts than we might already, or than that we might have assumed? I don't know, but I'm one of the points you make about driver training, Tony, so the specific crash that Governor DeWine called this working group together on was what happened last August. And, Taylor, I know you wrote about it. You can lean in a little bit on this too, but it was nearly a head-on collision, and the other oncoming, I believe it was like a work truck, crossed the center line. So, speaking about, driver training, how do you train for instances like that? I mean, I know that we're looking at crashes that happen every day throughout the nation, certainly paying attention to serious crashes and fatalities. And, I don't know, Taylor, I don't know what the count is, but it would seem to me that we see at least a couple dozen a year across the nation that they're involving another oncoming vehicle that strays across the center line, whether it's distraction, the driver fell asleep, and we haven't heard more from that investigation. I know that there was potential charges going to be placed against that other driver, but essentially the school bus driver swerved to get out of the way, and there was kind of a glancing blow. And of course, these school buses, they tend to be top heavy. It rolled over essentially, and that's where we had the ejection. And that's where the seatbelt advocates and experts say that's really where the technology comes to play there. Most of the time the opponents are referring to frontal and rear crashes, which can be very bad, obviously. And certain crashes just aren't survivable. But whenever you're talking about that side impact or that rollover, where, there's some good video that IMI, the manufacturers of safeguard seats and seatbelts have from their Center for Advanced Product Evaluation, CAPE, in Westfield, Indiana, that shows the impact of students when there is a rollover or a side impact, and how they're really launched out of that seating compartment, whereas the students that are wearing their lap shoulder belts are contained. And yes, there's always going to be some jostling, but the whole point is that students in one of these crashes, if they can be better protected, that if they can actually self-evacuate, they don't go unconscious or worse, or have such severe injuries they can't move, that they can actually evacuate themselves. And that goes to the point too of student transporters worried about having to cut students out of their seatbelts. Most likely, what you're going to be looking at to do that would be for the younger children. But some of those younger children, especially students with disabilities, they're already in child safety restraints that have more straps and whatnot than a regular lap shoulder belt. So I wrote a little bit about that in recently in one of my columns, where we hear some of those arguments, about the ramifications of seatbelts, but we don't hear those same arguments when we're talking about students with disabilities. So it's a very polarizing issue, but nevertheless, a very interesting development that came out of Ohio.
Yeah, and I honestly just want to commend Ohio because you guys might be able to know more, but this is the first time that I've seen a working group be prompted out of something like this. And these meetings were no joke. I mean, they were 2-3 hour long meetings, 14, 15 people in a room, and just openly talking about school bus safety. And so it was really interesting to watch. It was really informative. They brought in speakers from all different parts of school transportation. So the OEMs were there, law enforcement, the various agencies. And so just the amount of information that was shared to give these recommendations was it was phenomenal. Like, it was just really great to watch.
Yeah. And to that point too, I think the transparency. So there have been, many other working groups that states have called over the years, but now in 2024, well, this happened in late 2023, but we have YouTube. right? And they streamed every single one of these meetings, and most of them lasted like 4-5 hours. So, then they put them on the website. There was a web page that had all the links. And so, it was very transparent. That was for sure. And shows that going forward, what some states can do to shine their light on what they're doing regarding school bus safety and responding to these things. Because as we know, it's not if, but when. And school buses are extremely safe. Safest way to get kids to and from, but these things do happen. And so again, how can we learn from them?
Yeah, I also want to point out February issue out now, and that is our safety issue. Guys, if you haven't checked it out, stnonline.com. And if you go to the cover, you're going to see danger, best practices, technology to meet and address the risks around school bus stops, which, we didn't know at the time that this working group was going to come out with these recommendations. But here it is, very timely editorial team. Bravo. Definitely some fantastic conversation. And there it is right on the cover, research versus the ideology to find seatbelt debate. So, more of the conversation around the seatbelt debate clearly aligned with some of the headlines happening. Do you guys want to fill us in a little bit on some of the articles in the February issue?
Oh, yeah, certainly. So like, as you mentioned, Taylor takes a great look at danger zone. And we also talk about lap shoulder belts and, Carol Bruzazowski, one of our writers, she attended every one of these Ohio working group meetings that we were referring to, and looks at some of the crash data, around some different incidents that have happened recently in the industry, and kind of unpacks that. Look at, apps, certainly a lot going on with apps, as we've been talking about. One of the leading technology solutions that school districts are interested in. And, we know that New York City is rolling out parent apps. A lot going on in New York City that I think we can talk about in a little bit. But, how apps are not only changing the game in terms of parental communication, but in terms of safety, and being able to know where the school bus is. And that plays into the danger zone too, because the best practices in this industry is that students shouldn't be waiting really longer than 5 minutes for the school bus. And in this day and age of school bus driver shortages, we know one of the results has been late school buses in various districts all across the nation. We're here, smack dab still in the middle of winter. We had extremely cold weather through most of the country just a couple weeks ago. When we're recording this, a little bit more springtime. I know Puxatawny Phil came out last week and said winter was going to be shorter this year. But we're getting tons of rain here in California. So certainly parents don't want their kids standing out and waiting for the school bus, especially in inclement weather. So these apps, have that safety element too, that, they can alert parents of where the bus is in real time or near real time. And, the longer that students are out there at the school bus stop, just things can happen. We've seen reports, Taylor, of, students waiting for school buses and a car driving by loses control and hits them. I mean, just you don't want kids, especially unchaperoned, especially the younger ones out there. So there's certainly that safety element as well.
Yeah, it's a really good issue, I would say, looking at video as well. So kind of how video can be used as a coaching tool. And I also touch on it in my training article on the danger zone, is how you can ensure that school bus drivers are following proper protocol that you guys have set up as a district, and using video to review. And it's not necessarily using video to be like, oh, I caught you doing something wrong, but using video to show, hey, this is where you could have done better for the safety of the kids. And I think that's a huge proponent of school bus safety that could be utilized to help kids.
Yeah, I think being punitive, Taylor, that's always the fear, right? People think like, oh, this video is going to be punitive. They're going to try to gotcha me. And yeah, I think that kind of harkening back to even what the working group said, it comes back to providing training, providing constructive criticism that will help improve drivers' ability to do their job as best that they can, right? And these are certain parameters where video is going to tell the tale. Like it's almost like going to the gym and the trainer's like telling you to suck it in, do this, do that. And you just got a bad habit of doing this thing over and over again. And you need that constant reminder that you're going to need those little nudges, little reminders to kind of refocus yourself. So definitely lots happening in school transportation world. And before we dive into some more headlines, I want to drop you a message from our sponsor. Do you remember a time when you could just cherry pick the best solution to run your school transportation operation? The best routing software may be one company. The best parent app could be another company. Those days are over. TransFinder said the old way of doing business doesn't work for today's busy and burdened school transportation departments. They need one partner, one solution. TransFinder has embraced this approach for years now, building award-winning solutions like Route Finder Plus, the driver app Wayfinder, parent app Stop Finder, and inventory management solution Service Finder. They also have field trip management solutions, Trip Finder, and Viewfinder, which provide critical routing information to other stakeholders in the district. Add to this TransFinder's award-winning hardware and industry's best support and service. You have the ingredients that make up one partner, one solution. It's not just a slogan. It's TransFinder's way of doing business. Learn more by emailing getplus@transfinder.com or calling 800-373-3609. That's 800-373-3609. Remember, one partner, one solution.
So talking about punitive, Tony, New York City, I was mentioning earlier, a new pilot program that's rolling out this year. It's really a lot of things that it's trying to do. It's the school bus transition plan. So it's run by DCAS, which it's Department of Citywide Administrative Services there in the city. So we're talking New York City school buses, 30 to start with, 30 stop arm cameras. I know, punitively, illegal passing. That's really big in the news lately. Have been seeing a lot of pushback in different states, especially in Pennsylvania, where a lot of the motorists are saying, hey, this technology, it doesn't always work and this and that. And they're really, pushing back, and they're basically, a lot of them are trying to get out of their tickets. But we have speed limiters. There's going to be mitigating blind zones, talking about like the danger zone, look at that, surround cameras, pedestrian collision warning systems, backup sensors, defensive driver training, Taylor, harkening back to what was happening in Ohio. So a lot going on right now in New York. And as I mentioned earlier, we have, kind of related but separate apps, those parent apps that are being rolled out. So, it's going to be interesting to see how a lot of that factors or works out, because school bus contracts in New York City, that's a whole different beast. And the school bus driver unions, they dictate so much. They have so much power with what goes into those contracts and what's enforceable. So, working with the New York City folks, definitely, readers out there and listeners to the nation, certainly will have some editorial updates on that as we move forward.
All right, hey Ryan, thanks for those insights. I mean, I think again, Taylor, when we look at what's going on specifically with security, or when we look at video, or we look at safety devices, we always talk like drivers, right? It comes back to that type of individual. And I know there have been a lot of accidents, and they're almost like identifying fluke accidents, stuff that's very unusual. And I know there are different kind of outcomes that come from that are more severe than others. And this is where we look at kind of what are the mitigating circumstances of these challenging situations, and how do we as an industry look for that and say, how do we adapt? How do we grow? How do we learn from these things? And again, I think the bigger picture of this is, how do we take what Ohio has done as a framework and say, are there national implications of this? If we look at New York, are there national implications for some of these safety programs? And can we see them kind of disseminating out on a larger scale? So time will tell, but I really hope there's not an accident in every state for this to, like, the needle to move, but it's very reactive. And this has always been the case over the years, Taylor. Whenever we see something go down, like in Indiana, there's a reaction. There's definitely legislation, generally with the child's name in it, that goes around the country. And it's devastating to see this kind of stuff, but we got to learn from this. I mean, we just have to, as an industry, to take away these kind of big opportunities to really increase the safety. People call it the safety envelope, the safety umbrella, just the overall safety environment on and around the school bus. This is an opportunity, guys, to take a national story and leverage it to kind of advocate for your own district, to see if you can't get some of these technologies, and use Ohio as a perfect example of taking this to your administration and saying, hey, I really could use this technology to make our school buses safer. Look what they're doing in Ohio. Can we take this and move this forward, even at a local level? I feel like this is a great opportunity for you guys to really take this and run with it and bring it forward. So don't forget, go to stnonline.com, read the story that we have up there for you, use it to your advantage, and share it. I mean, our team has spent countless hours. Taylor did a bang up job on this article. So please take some time, read more about it, take advantage of these resources, guys, because it is invaluable to help make your kids safer, make your staff safer. Just overall, really good stuff, Taylor. All right, well, that is our episode for this week. We want to extend a special thank you to Ryan Gray, Taylor Akbatani, our sponsors, TransFinder and Zoom. Couldn't do it without you guys. Don't forget, you can listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. STN Expo this summer. Registration is open. Lock in the super early bird discount, $200 off your registration. Go to stnexpo.com. Pick Indianapolis, May 31st to June 4th, or STN Expo in Reno. That will be July 12th through the 17th. If you love us that much, you can go to both. Get double the discounts, right? We love that. So guys, we love you. We'll see you next week. All the latest headlines, updates, analysis every week. We got you covered, nation. We love you. We'll see you.